Okay, if it's Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time, that can mean just one thing. It's time for the goRIA live stream. I'm Chuck Philip, and as I like to do on these Wednesday afternoons is put a spotlight on what's new on www.goria.com. Now, what's new today is a brand new podcast that I had recorded just a couple of weeks ago with Robb Baldwin, who I'm sure you know is the founder and CEO of TradePMR. And we're talking, of course, about the fairly recent news of Robinhood acquiring TradePMR. And so I was kind of curious to get it right from the source, if you will, on kind of the hows and whys. And what I thought was really interesting, Robb is always a great person to interview. He's always very authentic, very straightforward. And even he himself initially said when Robinhood approached him, I'm not sure if I'm connecting the dots here. But then he went on to say after some research and he did some market studies, he saw the appeal and the synergies of these two firms getting together, which I didn't initially see. But once he explained them to me, which he does in this podcast, it made perfect sense. And actually, it's quite an interesting story on why they're getting together, how they're getting together, and what they're looking to do once they are together. And that's all in this podcast. Now, also in this podcast, and I'm going to tee up a little teaser, as I like to do in just a moment, I had the chance to ask Robb about his origin story. And I've been doing that a lot these days. And I'm just personally curious in general about a lot of stuff, but I'm really curious about how successful people, especially successful entrepreneurs like Robb, got to where they were. And so he was kind enough to share a really interesting origin story. And I'm going to tee up a little teaser of that right now. And you can hear for yourself. But do yourself a favor. If you like hearing a good entrepreneur success story, if you want to hear more about the hows and whys TradePMR and Robinhood are getting together, go to goRIA.com. The full episode is right up on top right this moment. But here's a little teaser that I did with Robb with regards to his origin story. But let's start off, as I like to do, especially when we have a real iconic figure as yourself. And everyone in the industry knows who you are, obviously. And those people like myself are curious about your origin story, as far back as you want to go. I'd be curious on what got you into the industry and then what got you to actually found TradePMR and what can you share us as far as some stuff that folks may not know already about you?
Well, it's actually a pretty cool story, at least from my standpoint. I was 13 years old and my grandfather was a big investor and he loved to pick stocks and he loved to invest and he had a broker. And when I was 13 years old, he sat me down next to him and he said, I'm going to teach you how to read the Wall Street Journal. So we would go through his entire portfolio of everything he owned. He'd explain to me why. He'd show me the price movements. And of course, that's in the days when fractions existed. So, you had stocks that were 16 and a quarter by 16 and a half and so forth. Mm-hmm. And so he explained, the ins and outs of how things traded, what the bid, what the ask were. All of those aspects, what volume he looked for, every aspect of his investment portfolio we went through. And a few days later, we went to go see his broker. And we sat down next to his broker, who was a female. And she looked at me and she said to me, so, Robb, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to do what you do.
Looks pretty good.
She said, well, it's a noble profession. It's really fantastic. And I said, yeah. I said, but I think I'd rather own the firm. And it really upset my grandfather that I said that. It was a smart alecky thing to say, but so he pretty much grabbed me by the ear and took me outside and said, don't ever talk to someone like that again. Mm-hmm. And I didn't mean any harm by it, but I just felt like, wow, whoever owns this place must be really successful. So, lo and behold, after going to school, doing an internship in college, I decided this was the route I wanted to take and got busy being a broker. Did that for
so again, that's just a little taste of what we were talking about. But just to give you a little bit more insight into where that story was going. So after his grandfather pulled him out by his ear, as Robb said, he went on to become a broker, right? And then, and I thought this was really kind of cool, he came across a magazine. And remember, this is a good number of years ago. I should have the number of years off the top of my head, but I think it was a good solid 20 plus years ago, maybe even more. And this magazine, the article, the lead article, right, the front page was how to start your own RIA, right? So this was not, a couple of years ago. The RIA space, of course, is very, very hot right now. This is 20, maybe 30 years ago when it was just starting off, and I think there were only like a few hundred RIAs out there, and Robb was one of the first ones. And I thought that was amazing. Did a great job building an RIA. That wasn't enough. He went on then to build his own custodian, as we know him as the CEO of TradePMR. So it's a great origin story. He's a great storyteller, and he's got some great stories to tell about his origin and moving himself up to founding TradePMR and then ultimately selling it to Robinhood. So there's a lot of good information there. And also he goes into a lot of detail on the merger itself and why it makes sense. And I agree, it makes a ton of sense. It's actually quite interesting. Some things are not immediately evident, but he talks about that on this podcast. So if you're interested, the full podcast is up right now. It's the first one up on the top of the page at goRIA.com. Check it out. And that's it for this week. On behalf of goRIA, fueled by Investment News, I'm Chuck Vela. I'll see you next Wednesday with some more content. Thanks for joining us. Take care.